Hi, I'm James West. This is Midas Letter Money. Today we're at the Market One Media Interview Zone in the Canadian Investment Conference in Vancouver, British Columbia. And my guest is Peter Spina, CEO of goldseek.com. Peter, thanks for joining us today.
Great to be here.
Peter, what I'd like to focus on with you is, let's start it off with a discussion of the absence of a response in the prices of precious metals in the face of rising geopolitical tensions in both Russia and Ukraine, as well as in Southeast Asia, as concerns China and its conflicts in the South China Sea. Why do you think there is no response in the gold price?
Well, I think there's a misunderstanding, especially in the West, of what's happening there. When you listen to the mainstream media in the West, I would say the propaganda that's coming out of the Western media is portraying a situation which I believe is a lot different. The U.S. and the West has been actively involved in overthrowing the current government in Ukraine and trying to install a pro-West, EU, NATO situation there, government, where Russia is seeing this as a big threat to their own security and to their own interests in that area. And just kind of thinking, if the United States was in Russia's position, wouldn't they react in the same way? It's a very strategic location for Russia, having NATO on their border and having the deep sea port in Crimea taken away. Those are things that they need to have, and to think that they weren't going to respond the way that they did. I think a lot of the Western media is portraying Russia as the aggressor. I don't believe that's the case. When you listen to the Russian RT.com, the Russian propaganda, I guess, you get a lot different view of what's going on.
Sure.
And you look at Ukraine, it's more of a pawn in a bigger game. I mean, it's a very strategic location. It's the largest country in Europe with some very valuable assets, natural gas, for agriculture, food production, shale, and so on. So there's some economic interest there, but it has a lot to do with, I think, in the end, the end game is trying to go after Russia. The West is trying to take their power and their influence in that area away. So the interesting part then is, well, this situation hasn't resolved. It's getting worse. It's turning into a civil war there. So the idea that things have calmed down there and gold has come back because things have been resolved. Nothing's been resolved there. I believe it's going to get a lot worse.
Right.
But what's happening now, this is pushing Russia to be more aggressive and finding a way to not be so reliant on the West. And we saw just last week this deal between China and Russia, $400 billion energy deal. They've said publicly that they need to secure their gold reserves, that they are talking about how to make the ruble or the yuan international reserve currencies. And I believe gold is an instrumental part of that. Russia bought 26 some tons of gold last month and continue to add even more aggressively. They're selling their U.S. Treasury bonds. I think this situation is going to push them to more quickly find a way to take away from the dollar supremacy in the world. I mean, that's really what gives the U.S. such a power in the world is U.S. military and the dollar's value.
Right.
So I think this is pushing China and Russia to be more, to come together more and find ways to not use the U.S. dollar.
Right. Okay, so then why, again, so that would suggest that you would expect to see a lot of upward pressure in the gold price. Do you think that the gold price, as translated into U.S. dollar terms, is a price that does not necessarily reflect the value of gold in terms of how the governments of China and Russia value it?
Right. I think the Western investor doesn't really understand the role of gold in its international monetary system and the changes that's happening. It's amazing to see that the transfer of wealth continues from the West to the East, that in the last year, the gold ETF, 15 million plus ounces has been removed, and that's found its way into China and India, and that's been a trend for the last decades. They recognize that gold for them is a way to bring trust and integrity to their currencies, and that's something that they really need to float, say, the yuan internationally. And they are making these agreements between Japan and China, China and other countries. They're looking for ways to not use the U.S. dollar and trade in their local currencies, but I think there's still a mistrust among them in the value of their currencies. Will they be able to retain their value? But I mean, the same thing's a problem with the U.S. dollar. They recognize that they're devaluing the U.S. dollar, and what are they going to do with it? And they're buying a lot of gold. And it's amazing to me that China is encouraging their own citizens to buy gold and they are buying gold at the same time. The central bank, the government is buying gold as well,
Right.
in massive amounts. So it's quite a big story, and I think it really hasn't been appreciated by the West what's going on.
Interesting. So then, in your sort of long-term worldview, from a standpoint of an investor, are you a buyer of junior golds in this market?
Yes, but very, very selectively. You have to be very careful in this environment. There are going to be companies that do quite well, and some of them have been actually rising in this market, but many companies, especially in the junior space, do not have the capital, don't have the access to capital, or do not have the right assets that can produce a profit. So there are companies who are making money at $18, $19 silver or $12.50 gold. But there's a lot of them that are losing money.
So why don't you give me an example of companies that excite you the most?
Well, recently I've been down to Mexico several times the last year looking at various mines. Exelon has the highest grading silver deposit in Mexico. They made a couple $1 million last quarter. Their all-in costs are so way below the current silver price, and they actually have additional money to go do exploration work, which many companies, the all-in costs for many primary silver producers is above or around what the current silver price is. Fortuna Silver, also low-cost producer. Gold Resource Corporation made a really good profit last quarter. Silvercrest. Those are all companies I have investments in, and some of them are sponsors on this site. So for full disclosure, I should make sure I mention that.
Okay.
But they are in excellent positions, and in these kind of environments, and we saw this in 08, 09, there's a really good opportunity to make a company and really grow it into maybe from a junior to a mid-tier silver producer down the road by acquiring cheap assets. So companies that they can make some moves here to really use this as an opportunity to make their company a lot bigger. So when we see the next run-up in gold and silver, some of these companies will be the leaders in the industry.
Interesting, fascinating. Well, thanks for joining us, Peter.
Thank you, James.
My guest today was Peter Spina. He's the CEO of goldseek.com. My name is James West. This is Midas Letter Money, coming to you live from the Market One Media Interview Zone at the Canadian Investment Conference in Vancouver, British Columbia.